Hi there, my name is Oonagh Murphy, and I am a theatre director who also works in the area of social inclusion and care.
How are you? Welcome, Una.
How's it going?
Great to chat to you. I suppose the way I started with kind of most interviews is kind of, was this always something that looking back now that you were destined to do, even though at the time you mightn't have realized it, or what was in your head when you were were you directing people when you were 6 and 7?
Yeah, was this the plan? Actually, looking back, I suppose I was really, yeah, I was. I was kind of the kid who would always be trying to get people to put on little shows. While the adults were talking, I was sort of going, "Come over here behind this curtain, and then we'll put this lamp on." And yeah, I was kind of. I mean, I did musical theatre classes myself from about the age of 4, just like probably because my parents wanted to have a couple of hours off. Like it's not in my family or anything, but yeah, I I definitely had the bossy sort of I have all the best ideas side of being a director down from an early age. I think most of my life has been trying to unlearn that impulse actually. um so yeah, it was early on, and then I think I wanted to like do acting for a long time. I was always kind of in shows and plays and stuff in school.
Okay.
Um,
And
and that was something that I felt it was a thing that I felt I was good at. So
and
that's
did you kind of did you watch? I mean, did you go to the theater, or was it film or TV, or kind of what was your input in relation to that?
um it really was musicals actually. Yeah. I mean, some directors or theater people in general can kind of cite, yeah, seeing something really serious at an early stage or something really worthy. But I just grew up watching a lot of the old musicals as well on video with my granny, and would have been brought to see kind of the big shows in the Olympia, and not just panto, but I suppose things that were sort of in the place of panto and that kind of thing. And yeah, I just had like sort of what from the age of 4 to kind of 17, I did at least one show a year. And so when I went into like I ended up going to Trinity to study drama and theatre studies, and like the first few months, and I was never sort of like, oh, I'm going to be a musical theatre star, but I kind of didn't really get that sometimes there's a bit of snobbery, like, kind of real theatre people maybe feel that musical theatre is sort of its embarrassing cousin.
Yeah,
um
but the amount of people like that I've spoken to through this and kind of in the industry, the very few of them actually, most of them come through that way. They kind of go
yeah,
panto or watching TV, or and I think it's
yeah,
at a later age they acquire a different or a joint sensibility. But we use that. I mean,
yeah.
talk about the performative nature. I mean, like if you're doing a musical year and kind of going to me, like, did you have a favorite? Like, where you kind of was there one that was kind of your go-to?
So I have, yeah, I mean, I have sort of nostalgic memories of things like Singing in the Rain, because, like even as a small child, you realize that you're watching kind of masters at work. So stuff like, anything where there was these kind of big, amazing kind of cinematography as well as choreography, and, Easter Parade and all those kind of really old ones.
Yeah.
I did embarrassingly, the woman who sort of did the musical theatre, did the shows in our secondary school, thought it was perfectly fine to 2 years in a row I played the lead part. There might have been a year in between, but anyway, within a space of about 3 years, I played both Calamity Jane in Calamity Jane and then Annie in Annie Get Your Gun, which is essentially the same part.
Yeah.
So it would appear that sort of slightly kind of queer cowboy, no messing kind of 1950s style Western
Yeah.
camp. That's my vibe, apparently. I don't know how everyone else felt, but I had a great time.
Suddenly, you know, you kind of go, what the hell's going on? All
Yeah.
the rest of the school going, that's not fair. That's not
I
fair.
mean, that absolutely is what happened. So yeah.
But during your secondary school days, where like when you obviously going to do Trinity to do the drama courses, kind of a did that kind of acting kind of thing obviously became was it exploratory for you, or it's like we kind of going in going, well, I'm not sure what I want to do, but I want to explore, or was like, no, I want to be an actor?
No, I don't think I really knew what I was doing. It was sort of like, I'll do this. I also nearly went to, like, I wanted to do art as well, but I just thought the whole thing of, having to do a portfolio when you're leaving cert year just seemed like, oh, maybe I'll just do this instead. So actually, the fact that I was kind of, it wasn't really like I'm going to Trinity because I'm not going to RADA. I genuinely was interested in theatre as an art form. And it was quite early on that I realized, actually, I think probably not acting, but something on this side of the...
Yeah. And go back to secondary school. I mean, were you, because, your academic achievement in Trinity was kind of huge, and was that something that was there for you in second, were you a studious person? Was that kind of something you found easy?
I wouldn't say I was studious, but I am lucky enough that I found it quite easy. Yeah. I was kind of, I was really into English. I was really into, like, I did a lot of debating in school, and I was kind of lucky enough that I found the subjects I found hard, I didn't find them hard to a degree that, meant I was sort of panicking or anything like that. So, yeah.
So talk to me a bit then about going in, as you say, to Trinity and that shift and kind of, coming from, performatively or kind of, a musical theatre, whatever, not background, but like that's your experience doing that and kind of being immersed in a whole potentially different world. Was it kind of...
Yeah, well, I had the very kind of immature response of being quite resistant and a bit sort of, I thought Trinity was quite... I had a blanket kind of, everybody's a bit up themselves. And, I wouldn't say, Greystones is like, Connell coming down from Sligo, but I really didn't feel an immediate affinity with the kind of easy way that people were able to kind of frame their ideas and really kind of, have arguments about plays that they'd only read the first scene of and all this kind of thing. So I found it all a bit tedious for a while, but then I kind of realized, okay, it's, it's a good lesson in, I actually remember one of the mature students, terrible to even say that, but just a lovely man who's in our course. And one of the days I'd come out of a seminar and, there was just kind of, just one of those sort of slightly like everybody has a more academic point than everybody else. And Gabriel Pilo actually is still working in theatre. He said to me, never confuse verbal dexterity with intelligence, and I remember just going, oh yeah, okay, like it's okay to actually have so many different ideas that you don't need to argue for any of them in that context. And it's okay to sit on the fence, and it's okay to not know yet. And I mean, I wouldn't say like that changed how I approached the whole thing forever, but I think there is, I mean, it's a thing about higher education that, like, sort of the people who feel most at home are often those who've had, quite privileged experiences in their secondary education. So after that I sort of felt like, okay, well, I'm just going to get from this what I can get from it. And
we had mentioned about kind of discovering that it wasn't, the acting side of things. Was Was that painful for you? I mean, was that kind of a, or was it kind of a natural fit, or a natural kind of progression?
No, it didn't feel. No, I don't think so. Um, I just had a couple of experiences as an actor in student plays and student kind of player stuff where I just went, oh, sorry, my light's going in and
Okay, you go.
out. I I just kind of thought, I'm I'm a I'm an observer of people, and I would watch a director trying to get what they wanted from an actor or from a
Yeah.
designer or whatever, and I would watch the communication sort of fail epically and think, I I feel I could get a better result. And I still have that sense of like, so much of directing, so much of theater making is, I mean, it's communications, whether we, so I think I just sort of felt that feels like a good application of how I move through the world, to be both able to kind of observe and it's pedagogical as well, really, isn't it? Some of the time that sounds patronizing, other times we're learning. But yeah, I think it was a few experiences that I found ultimately maybe a bit frustrating, and I just kind of thought, okay, well, maybe I'll give that a go
Yeah.
instead.
And then when you started doing that, like, was it duck to water time, or was it, in relation to, did you?
um Not really. Like, we started off devising, really, and so it was director in basically just name, or like I'd be the person who'd end up having to like make sure we had all the props, which is or like whatever. It was like, well, Una's the director, so she'll have to sort that. So I was in college with Aisling Byrne and Lisa Walsh, and that was kind of the early days of what eventually became Talking Shop Ensemble,
Yeah.
and with our friend Robbie Sinnott as well. So we were devising, and we were ultimately all kind of the directors, but I suppose I was the one then that maybe it was that I was less interested in performing as time went on, so they were more interested, or in other aspects of it. So then it was kind of like, okay, I'll be the outside eye.
Okay. And is that something like like, were you interested in that role? I mean, obviously, just looking at your kind of career, kind of since then, and you kind of, you have referred to yourself in the past kind of as a storyteller, and kind of been interested in the whole idea of kind of story making and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, but academically, where you, or are you, or have you been interested in that kind of role, in the role of whatever director is?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think in a way, like those early years, what we were trying to do, like leaving Trinity, was in a way try to tell stories that we had probably not quite discovered in the course of our degree. We had a kind of a sense of like, now I suppose everybody has this sensibility that we should kind of amplify stories that we haven't heard. But we really did have at the time, quite a radical feminist, before that term has kind of gone to the dark side. But we really did want to kind of to tell stories that we felt were reflective of what was going on, in Dublin at the time. So we made a show straight out of college, which was like, I mean, we were actually laughing about it recently. Like, you'd never try and pull off something with that level of ambition, except for when you're sort of 21. We took over the campus of NCAD, and we did this mass kind of promenade piece about basically about the recession, because we'd kind of come out of college to look an annihilated
Yeah.
financial landscape. Anyway, so we did this show, and it was kind of telling the story of Anne and Barry, who had been our in our school books as kids, and was Anne and Barry, in whatever it was, 2009. And yeah, we were trying to, I suppose that was there was a sort of an academic or a political or a kind of ideological impulse behind it, which was to try and sort of lay bare what we saw as the kind of the sort of moral rot at the core of sort of Irish public life at the time, and try and locate sort of a way forward as young artists in the world. So we had a great time, and any of the shows that we made around that time had that same kind of like, this feels important.
Yeah. And I mean, like, just to go back to kind of the end of college, I mean,
Yeah.
you did say achieve a very high level of, I mean, that must have been, it's an amazing achievement. You know, gold medals, distinctions, foundation scholar. You know, that's no mean way of leaving college.
Well, the skulls was, I just really wanted to live on campus. I mean, it's a great motivator, because my parents lived too close to really justify moving into town. So the minute I heard that, oh, you can do this exam in second year, and if you get a first in it, then you're like, what?
Yeah.
Free accommodation and a free meal every day. And then I suppose, I mean, it's kind of, it's funny to think of now, sort of achievements that at the time, they feel like a big deal, but many people who don't have degrees make brilliant art. So it sort of quickly becomes a thing where it's almost sort of bizarre, really.
No, it's kind of, I remember like when I went back to college for the second time, I did a degree in English. I remember my aunt and uncle kind of sitting me down and kind of going, and ended up doing very well, doing a master's. But I remember them sitting there. So what job now are you going to get out of this? And I was like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm still trying to find that one out.
I know.
But commit to me, when you left, I mean, as you say there, you kind of emerged into an Ireland that had radically changed nearly over the time that you've been in college, and particularly the industry that you found yourself kind of emerging into. The whole company structures were being kind of lacerated, funding changes, and you mentioned, something that's a thread through your whole career has been, I suppose your interest, or kind of your passion around, social justice, socio-politics, whatever, that kind of arena and access. But I suppose, as you say yourself, coming out within that time, you're kind of, never mind working with sort of disenfranchised people, you were that. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was no access to an industry around that time. Even people that were in the industry were getting kind of, kicked out.
Yeah, we were on social welfare,
Yeah.
Or I think I had a part-time job that I could work sort of like long shifts in, and then take other days off to try and make shows. But that was the landscape, and that is, and it's an important thing, and an important message even now is that the artists, for the most part, unless you're a sort of a Booker Prize winner, like the artists are the working class.
No, I mean,
reality.
I've been kind of screaming a lot recently is that, organizations that I've worked in throughout my life, and say in Access now in Ballymun, like, we obviously work an awful lot of in kind of, creative learning, participative arts, whatever you want, moniker you want to call it. But I often, say that, the artists that you're kind of placing in a school or placing in a youth group are probably poorer than the people that are in that.
Maybe.
But no one ever talks about that.
I know.
But certainly back then, I think that was a huge. Well, sorry, certainly back then, but probably even worse now. But how did you then find your way? I mean, obviously, over that couple of years you were making work, and then the Abbey and the resident assistant director came up. What was your kind of pathway to there? Like, how did that?
Well, we made a show called I'm a Homebird, It's Very Hard, with Sean Dunn, and that was kind of it was a show about emigration, and it was about staying in Ireland when all of your mates are leaving, and it kind of I suppose it caught people's imagination. Fiach came to see it, and on the back of that, I think both myself and Sean, like, I think Sean had a commission with them within the next year, and I started as resident assistant director, and I worked in the Abbey for I think it ended up being about 18 months, sort of year as a solid assistant director, and then I was kind of between things like the literary department and the casting department as well. So
And
Yeah.
an incredible experience. I mean, I suppose, coming from a college situation to a, theatre making your own kind of nascent company and kind of trying to make a way, and then, getting into that machine, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also getting to work. I mean, when you AD on Alice and kind of Alice in Funderland and kind of
Yeah.
there was an opening up going on around that.
Yeah, there was, like Philly and Jenny were doing, not Riot, oh my God, it's completely, I'm getting old. Work, exactly. Work in the basement in the Peacock,
Yeah,
like, and obviously, Alice was on stage. So yeah, it was amazing. And lots of like younger writers coming through in the Peacock around that time as well.
yeah,
And a literary department kind of, workshopping stuff, even if they didn't always make it to the main stage. But there was a sense of kind of like, I suppose on a basic kind of financial level, like Fiat had sort of steadied the ship, and there was a
yeah,
sense of recovery,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
But within that time as well, you directed. You got to direct in the Peacock as well. I mean, that must have
Yeah.
been fantastic to kind of go.
Yeah, I know. And looking back now, you kind of think, God, uh, like, I don't know how many people have come through the assistant director scheme even since I did it, which was the end of 20, like I finished in 2012. And then, yeah, I directed a Nancy Harris play and an Elaine Murphy play. Which, yeah, it was amazing. And it's exactly, it's the perfect space for that kind of work. It's the perfect space for people cutting their teeth in that way. Yeah.
And was there an aesthetic at that stage, or kind of a way of working that was it something that you were kind of searching for yourself, or was it something emerging for you?
Well, I found it quite difficult when I first went into the Abbey because I didn't have any sort of experience, and therefore had a sort of youthful ignorance, I suppose, to putting on, big classic plays. Um, and I still, the argument is still there, why this, not that, and what does this production do that previous haven't, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's something that when you're working in a building like the Abbey, you have to kind of continuously reassess and not let things become stale. But I mean, I had both. I had experiences of working on kind of traditional stagings of plays, but then working with somebody like Wayne, where you just suddenly realize, okay, actually, here is a young working class queer director taking on a play that has been done thousands or well hundreds of times, but this feels so different when he does it.
Yeah,
And that's a pretty powerful experience to have as a kind of an apprentice at that stage.
yeah,
And also just seeing somebody hold space in a place that was maybe never intended to be a place where they would have authority. I mean, I think that's always a powerful thing to witness and to work alongside. And I've kind of sort of had a few experiences like that in my career.
yeah,
And you interpolate them, and you sort of you kind of use them then yourself to kind of hold space and to make space for other people as well. So it was formative in that kind of way, and in an aesthetic way, I would say, because like for me, the two things are never separate. Like when people say aesthetic doesn't need to be politicized, I mean that's because your aesthetic is the status quo. So
yeah. I think that's a brilliant way of putting it about that kind of space, and about because I think around that time, in Irish theatre, there was kind of obviously a funding change, but also then there was a whole new swathe of like, Philly and Jenny and This Is Pop Baby and Wayne and kind of,
yeah,
and there's a whole new different voices and queer
yeah,
voices actually,
yeah,
from the margins in and taking that space
yeah,
in the mainstream, and it was. I won't say normative, but it was kind of fantastically that kind of it was
yeah,
it was yeah, it was announced, but there was no kind of fireworks about it. It was like, this is like,
No, totally. I agree. And it was also not used in a kind of, and I think there's a danger, that this can happen, which we can discuss in terms of other kind of, in terms of other people who've been underrepresented. It also wasn't used as a USP, as a marketing tool. It
yeah,
was just, here are these people making art that you absolutely have to see.
yeah,
And then when you come, it's a gift,
yeah,
because it's fun, and it's kind of radical in a queer, in a camp way.
yeah. In some bizarre way, radical the way normal life is.
Yeah,
Do you know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean, I always kind of, I talk about the radicalness of ordinary day living, that kind of, that we need to
yeah,
just transplant
yeah.
the art rather than try and create something else. You know,
Completely. Like that, of course, like Tony Flynn is going to be the Queen of Heartstown, and she kind of reminds you of your neighbor. Like that's it.
yeah,
It's both kind of recognizable, uncanny, all at the same time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And come here, around that time as well. Then it's kind of the UK. The what was it? The doc
Yeah.
was kind of, and was that kind of always in your head? That kind of, I mean, or how did London come about?
Um, how did it come? I suppose I did have the sense that if I wanted to, I don't know. I do. I think the received wisdom was like, go away, and then maybe when you come back, they'll let you do more things,
Yeah,
which is kind of what happened in a way. And I had, yeah, I suppose I was interested in, I was kind of drawn to the Donmar as like a smaller, it's not a big space, but it's world renowned, and
yeah,
it sits in a position, well, certainly at the time it was, it didn't rely hugely on public funding.
yeah,
So it had a really interesting relationship with its audience. So yeah, and I kind of just I had a taste of working in buildings that I kind of wanted to keep going with,
yeah.
and explore.
I mean, through that time, and if you look kind of at those kind of, let's say, formative years, but kind of, at those times, I mean, you said you kind of, that tradesperson, like, the apprentice, and the people that you kind of got to work with are extraordinary.
Yeah,
From John Crowley, Josie Work, as you mentioned, I mean, they're, and really,
yeah,
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 you know,
yeah.
that's
No, it's a total. I mean, it's a privilege, and something. It's just something that you just getting, because sometimes people have to do assisting kind of on their own terms, and they're badly paid or not paid at all or whatever.
yeah,
But actually, to get the opportunity to kind of be employed, to collaborate with such a range of people as well, because you
yeah,
just learn very quickly.
yeah,
Okay, that makes sense. That doesn't make sense. Oh, I wouldn't do that. Oh, I never thought of doing that.
yeah. But also as well, I suppose, it sounds like it was a very fruitful or kind of, collaborative relationship in that as well. Because obviously, assistant can mean very, very different things and very different,
Yeah,
and I think, both the organizations and the time within which you were in them, seem to have been very open in that way.
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the Donmar. It was about 2 years into Josie Rourke and Kate Pakenham taking over, after Michael had been there for, I want to say, about 10 to 12 years. And it was seen as this, massive thing. It was the first time two women were running one of the kind of big London theatres. And yeah, that was just an amazing kind of moment to be part of.
And then the West End, kind of that, working in that environment as an associate, I think
Yeah.
that's again a whole different place, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that was a very different way of looking, not different way of looking at things, but a different animal, I suppose, or a different machine.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, delighted to have done it. Again, all of these experiences sort of empower you to be able to say yes to certain types of work and gigs or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the West End as a sort of monolith is yeah, it's well, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year. I mean, I think it's fascinating that like people like Cameron McIntosh are being sort of spoken about in the same sentence as a small arts centre in, you know, Scarborough, as in like, God, we have to help these people. It's like, that's a millionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
They're okay. So in a way, it's like, you know, they've kind of painted themselves into a corner and we can't really help them.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
going to be an interesting, say, next 5 years in relation to what's rebuilt, or what, you know, particularly in relationship on both islands between the commercial and the subsidized sector. But then I suppose you from that moment then started to kind of work in both spaces. You know what I mean? There was around, I think the next couple of years was kind of working with Drew in the Galway Arts Festival, but also then setting up Change of Address. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of, and I suppose I don't know where was the drive coming from, but I mean that was a statement. Do you know what I mean? There was your directing work, and your directing work in an aesthetic that was kind of building, and or way of working that was kind of big, that was growing. But then the whole, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to separate them out, but just in relation to a narrative maybe around them. Then the whole idea of creative projects or engagement with, say, people who don't have space or who aren't represented. And that kind of came at a time as well that, you know, one looks at those things now in the last couple of years as being more like not mainstream, but like there's more agency maybe around that type of work. But even 5 years ago, there wasn't. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of, and particularly within the arts, it was very difficult to draw to. I know from kind of experiences of being here for the last decade or so, you know, to carve out a space that wasn't tick boxy, that wasn't always in the great that Ballymun has an art centre. You're kind of going,
yeah.
You know, so I think talk to me a bit about that drive, say, to change a bit of address first.
Well, I think I was trying to figure out what was possible. You know, was it possible to integrate what was, you know, part of the way I viewed the world that was kind of increasingly harder to ignore. Change of Address at the time, like it came out of, I think it was the summer when there was really sort of more media focus on the plight of refugees. We'd also just had Waking the Feminists, and it, you know, what it had done for sort of raising awareness and giving voice to the underrepresentation of women in the arts, and I suppose it was a way that, so obviously, as you know, it was Maeve and Moira and I, and we were really just trying to explore what it meant to put into action the idea of kind of pulling others up with you, you know, of kind of trying to give access in the way that we and others have been fighting for access for us as women.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose sorry, just to say, I mean, I'm kind of, as you mentioned it, I wanted to kind of talk about Change of Address as a kind of way back into, but obviously Waking the Feminist. I'm not just kind of skipping over, but I'm more kind of looking at, because of the space you talked about in yourself, the space for you, obviously within an industry, but also then the further step from that, that you kind of went, feck this, you know what I mean? There's a whole other piece of work. But maybe before we go on with Change of Address, I think it's just worth noting, you know, that grassroots emergence, and a real grassroots emergence around Waking the Feminists, beyond the specificity of the beginning, kind of, you know, grew into this huge, in the best way, the best piece of collaboration is that the individuals can still stay as in individuals without being subsumed. I think that was its power, that it kind of it vocalized things for individual people. And yeah, I mean, you know, from being on around, and it was the most fundamentally powerful thing that I'll probably experience in my time in Irish theatre and across all things. But I think also it enables so much more afterwards. I mean, I think that's not spoken about maybe as much as what it started for women in the arts.
Yeah, do you mean in terms of sort of the example that it became for what's possible? Yeah.
But again, you know, I can imagine, and I've spoken to people, it wasn't easy. I either though. It's not like, you know, it's not like, oh yeah, let's do this and everything. You know, it's like anything else. They're hard fought. That's hard fought ground.
Yeah, and you know, we have a small community, and it's difficult for people to both voice what they have felt are, you know, manifestations of a power structure that have affected their careers, and then to sort of live and work alongside some of the people who either do represent those power structures, or who sort of are worried that that's what they represent as well. So, you know, you know, I think we all had kind of conversations between, you know, men and women, sort of going like, have I ever done that? Or, you know, do I? But that's all good. It's all good. It's all healthy. And, you know, I think it's a really good example of what's needed, and maybe what's falling away now in society is that kind of everybody having quite grown up conversations where people mind their own defensive reactions. Because we're all guilty of that, you know. And I think in a funny way, Waking the Feminists shouldn't have worked for those reasons, because I think a lot of people felt very rattled, and a lot of people, rightly so, who felt that, well, I haven't actually benefited from this thing that you call the patriarchy, and yet you're telling me that I have to stand aside and my play isn't going to get produced, or whatever it was. You know, and I think we were, for the most part, able to say, okay, but that you're actually asking the wrong question there. So the question then comes back to a culture of abundance, a culture of us feeling like there's plenty to go around, as opposed to a culture of scarcity, which is what we've been given by sort of decades of neoliberal arts policy. So actually, if you will fight with us, we will all fight together for this idea that we should all be paid more and we should all have more resources. But like, I'm not going to fight for your right to have your play produced over somebody else just because you're a man. Like, I'm not going to do that.
But I think you've just nailed something there that's kind of, and I think it is more obvious now, and particularly actually since lockdown, bizarrely, and particularly since, you know, both patriarchal structures, but also the power structures in the arts are now laid bare more than ever. And it's not about fault, it's about fact, you know. And you know, getting more money into the sector doesn't necessarily mean anything is going to kind of change. But also because social discourse has in a way become so radicalized, particularly when there's no human contact for the last 4 months. And I think it's very dangerous, you know, that sense of not being able to have adult conversations around grey areas. Is very, particularly because the arts is one of the hallowed grounds on which you can do that, or you know, particularly theatre. I think beyond the live experience, I think that's what's been taken away with these Zooms. You know what I mean?
Completely.
But take me back. I mean, you kind of, you know, there was so much upheaval, say, around that Waking the Feminists time. That kind of, that was brilliant. But it's like anything else, when you kind of pound the ground and the kind of dust rises, you know, you really notice the way people are reacting to things. And you kind of go, okay, that's interesting. That, you know, but then, you know, it's about, and thankfully an awful lot of work was done, but also a sense that it can't be, oh, that happened, that's great. And then we go, that we can't put that massive juggernaut into a tick box. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think what you've done in both your career and, you know, in the continuation of that and others like you is that by actually galvanizing a much wider frame, it makes it extraordinarily difficult to ignore the changes that are made. You know, you kind of go, sorry, it's a very long question and more hobby horse rather than a question. But
No, it's good.
I get asked the whole time about, like, you know, how is Access so embedded? How is it? You're kind of going, well, because it's here and because that's what it's supposed to be doing.
And it's not a one-time only event.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It's because it's your ongoing interrogation of what that even means.
Yeah. And but I suppose,
yeah.
But also isn't that what we're all paid to do? Isn't that what we're all supposed to be doing? And
yeah.
I'd rather talk about, if that's not the case, let's talk about then what are we supposed to be doing and why aren't we, you know, so I think there's kind of those bigger macro conversations. But you're right. Back to Waking the Feminist, mark off his hot hobby horse. In relation to that, you mentioned scarcity.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It gets into kind of crabs in the bucket kind of time as well. But when you've excavated that, you know, as you say, it is a small industry and it's a pressure on individual independent artists to be able to live within that space as well, and to kind of not feel then tokenistically that they're kind of, you know, that they're kind of trying to furrow that ground. So so that change of address is a big thing, you know, that kind of, well, look here, there's a bit of spotlight here now, and let's go after this.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, there's things that I thought about how sort of Access worked in that year that, you know, I just sort of have, you know, your thinking evolves, and so we were sort of saying, well, here's the conversation about gender, but what about, you know, all of the other sort of barriers to people's stories being on our national stage, for example, or whatever stage. But then you sort of start to dig into it, and then you go, okay, actually, this is much deeper. This is, you know, it's not about, oh, there's, you know, I mean, sorry. So it happened a little bit Waking the Feminists, where people then sort of started going, well, okay, then where are the plays? Where are the plays? And so, well, the plays haven't been written. The plays are in people's heads because either A, they have, you know, childcare issues, or they have another job to pay their bills, or because they have, you know, for want of a better word, self-esteem issues, that anybody would even be bothered even giving them notes for the first draft of their play. So it's sort of belligerent to go, well, where are these people then? And you kind of see it happening, I think, with this conversation a little bit now around sort of race and diversity. Is okay, well, where are they? Well, they aren't at the level that they're ready to be put on the stage because you've ignored them, you have ghettoized them, you've actually incarcerated many, you know, people who've come to this country in search of a better life. So that's why they haven't, oddly enough, got the play written. So we were kind of trying to backtrack that, learning very quickly, going, okay, actually, really what this needs to be about is a kind of a much longer term thing, which is just to go, well, there was two kind of levels to it. One is like to sort of use our collaborative skills to enable people to sort of develop as artists and to develop creatively, you know, in various different contexts, like going to direct provision centres and doing workshops, but then also actually just to highlight for the kind of greater public why, if we continue on the way we are now with direct provision, there will still not be a sort of a rich and diverse cultural life in Ireland in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
Because these kind of once off, oh, let's get a writer who's writing about this and they are tokenism. And actually what you need to do is something that constantly interrogates the various ways that people are have barrier to their access to being in our spaces, to being any space. So yeah, so it was grassroots, and it was kind of like, oh, let's try this, and we did this, and it was, and then it became, we did a lot of work around kind of LGBT rights in direct provision centres, because that's, that, well, I suppose it was an intersection of a couple of different issues, and it was in the years after marriage equality, and it was sort of like, okay, gays and allies, so great that we've got this, but guess what? So really trying to sort of like look the ways that the people whose identities are at an intersection of oppressive structures, systematic racism and compulsory heterosexuality, how can we help those people? And sometimes that turned into art, and sometimes it just stayed as kind of what might be thought of as like kind of community building or care. And that always felt okay. It felt right, and it felt like not always having sort of a production deadline, or a sort of a pot of funding that was about spending it to make a piece of art, as you say, kind of this tokenistic approach. That felt quite important.
Yeah.
With change of address.
But it's also dealing with people where they're at. Do you know what I mean? Rather than
yes,
rather than trying
exactly.
to, we've kind of, I've been talking to, say, Lorraine Marr, for example, who's a mixed race Irish activist and
I know Lorraine. Yeah.
She now is starting a residency with us to explore
Yeah.
the area of other. But that's an interrogation as much of access as it is of.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool, because I was talking to her about it on her chats last week, and like we put out bursaries for work about bringing on, and like the level of race that applied was kind of virtually nil, and you're kind of going, wow. So you kind of go, you can be inclusive, and you can be demonstrably inclusive when you're reaching out and engaging with artists on a long-term basis, but as a society as a whole, the responsibility to create those frameworks in which people feel comfortable to, and I'm not just talking about access now, I'm not talking about kind of just generally that well, it doesn't become, oh, here's the traveller play, or here's the black play, or and I think that we've had, as they work over, because of the context within which we kind of are situated within a disenfranchised Mariac community for many decades. The work had very similar to what you just spoke about there. The interrogation around that was always about equality and inclusion, and even sitting in an organization like that, you're still kind of up against the barriers that people feel in society and are reflected upon your organization, and that's really interesting. And I think that's certainly when looking at your work and kind of engaging with you around change of address, it's fascinating, because one of the big things we find here is we try and find, we don't, and I remember being on an institutional marketing course once, and they're kind of going, you have to tell people about all this stuff, and I'm kind of going, yeah, if we're bringing people from Balseskin to come and see a play, it's not necessarily about a photograph of them in the foyer. Now, in certain contexts, obviously, to champion them and champion your work, you have to, but it's a very fine line between that, which is kind of a hard line to hold.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's like, constantly having to ask the question, is this good for the individual or the community that I'm dealing with, or is it more for the organization? And then sometimes is what's good for the organization circularly then comes back to being good for the individual, because you get more funding and you're able to continue the scheme or whatever. So that's a kind of a fine line. And I think asking those questions, and then also recognizing parts of it that are also to do with ego and feeling like, okay, that's me done now, I've kind of I've done my thing, which we're all having to kind of unlearn, that this is lifetime work, and it's legacy work. Actually, it's not even lifetime work. It's like you're being part of a wider conversation that it's not going to end when you're gone.
No, absolutely. And I'm a firm believer that all, say, arts funding contracts from the state should include a percentage of one's time that your project has to reflect the national frame, rather, particularly institutions like local Like, I mean, you know, I'm obviously the director here, but also my role and work has a huge part to play in a national conversation.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
unless that's there, everything can become very inward looking and very kind of.
Yeah.
Can we talk to me? I mean, from that, then you know, you started to work a lot in Ireland. You know, around
Hmm.
you know with the Lear and then Creaking, brilliant Creaking on you know, national tours and Poor Little Boy Noir. You know, and that and I suppose after spending a lot of time in London and kind of was that a really nice thing to do, to kind of have stuff that was kind of touring around the country and stuff that was kind of you were in a lot of it at the very newness of
Mm.
it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, it's nice to sort of feel like there's a momentum as well, and you're not having to kind of constantly. I mean, so much of being a freelance director is hustling and kind of thinking, you know, 18 months in advance. But I think if you're lucky enough to be working, to be a jobbing director in a country where it's, you know, on one side of the country, if you do a show, people might actually hear about it on the other side of the country. That's, you know, you can definitely kind of um, feel the effect of building up from that. Yeah, and I think also, you know, like I'm back in London now, but I do think around that time I was really kind of interested in how you can kind of shape conversation, like the civic part of it as well. I mean, not all the work felt political in that way, and sometimes it is fun to just do something just because it's you know, aesthetically pleasing or whatever. But yeah, it definitely felt like, okay, if you kind of keep your foot on the gear on the gas here, you can build something up.
Yeah, yeah. And around that time as well, you kind of spent some time in the attic in the Irish
Yeah.
College as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, again, you know, I think in years to come, if you talk about legacy, I think there will
Exactly.
be tomes written about the transformational nature of
Yeah.
that organization.
Yeah, I mean, they're just amazing, absolutely amazing, and just continuously, like, there's an organization that continuously, like, Jane Siobhan and everyone who works with them, they just always interrogate how they interact with the system, and you know, who they are empowering and what sort of structures they're upholding. Really, really good example of that. Yeah.
I think interrogation, that word is coming up again and again from.
Mm.
I think that's, you know, that and that yes, but you know what I mean. It's kind of yes,
Yeah.
and that's great. You know, that's an exhausting process, and I'd imagine it can be going, okay, brain, stop saying yes,
Yeah.
but tell me about and I'm gonna stop myself talking for the rest of the interview about this production because I absolutely loved it. But Tribes,
Mm.
I saw Tribes in Barrow Street in New York. Jesus,
Oh yeah.
2010, 11. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were over there doing the parting glass, and I saw it
Yeah.
around that time. But so when I saw you were doing it, kind of, well, Jesus. I mean, I love the show, but also what you did with it was extraordinary, and the central, all the performances were fantastic, but the central duo were just amazing. So I suppose
They were amazing. Yeah.
in a way that social justice piece, that aesthetic piece, that
Mm.
big house piece, you know, that
Mm.
it's a wonderful play, you know,
Yeah.
but I presume as a director, there's a lot there technically that needs to be overcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a challenge. Yeah, Jesus, it was huge. It was huge. And it was my first time working in the gate, and yeah, sometimes shows have like one thing that you're kind of like trying to figure out as you go along, and you know, it's a new variable in the system. But that show had at least three, if not, I'm sure more. But then that makes it really satisfying. Really, yeah. You know, I think that was one of those plays where, and I know you always want to think this, but like I did genuinely feel once it was up and you know, we had houses in. I really did feel I don't really care about anybody else's opinion on this. And that, you think you often strive, like that's what you want to feel. But I just kind of felt like I'm really proud of the work of the company and of pulling it all together. And I know it's important, and it's important work in terms of what it's saying. And so, yeah, I did feel with that one, I was like, okay, this is how it should always feel.
I mean, like from your, I mean, obviously you've kind of directed a huge variant of different plays, from devised, you know, from theatre making work, for want of a better word, to brand new plays, to classics or reinterpretation of classics. But I mean, is there a textual piece in you? Like, you know, do you go in that way, or is it, what way would you, or is it depending on the project doing it?
I think it depends on the project. Yeah, I think it depends on the project. I think I generally have to feel that there's something happening within it that, you know, because often I like, especially with those kind of plays for the gate, like it'll have been done somewhere probably to great critical success. And so then you have to sort of go, well, if I'm going to do it, yeah. But, you know, and sometimes, you know, sometimes it can just be a really subtle thing, which is like, oh, I actually read something really differently in that scene. You know, like, I think one production I really felt that with was when we did Mojo in the Lear. And like, Lachlan, I don't think you'll mind me saying this, but he literally had to persuade me to do that play, because I was just like, I think it might be really misogynist. I don't know. But actually what we ended up doing was something, and it was beautiful, because it was working with, you know, a company of actors who just went, yeah, let's go. And just, you know, we, like, the level of kind of really deep and quite brave exploration that company of young actors did meant that what we ended up producing, Graham Wybrow, who worked in the Royal Court at the time of the original Mojo, was just like, I never knew that was all in there. And it's like, yeah, because it's always been directed by straight men. Like, you know, it's that is sometimes when you go, okay, well, what can we find in this?
Yeah. I mean, it's gas, because you say that, and then you look at, you know, say Playboy, like last in the game, and similarly, like radical's a completely overused word, but I think I'd say very normal for you as a director. Like, do you mean in relation to what you find or what you bring to something? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, I'm going to sit down here now and be radical about this. It's kind of like just that's what you find.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, and there are productions where people feel very sort of freed by that, and there are productions where people get a bit scared of it. And Playboy, I think, was split down the middle. There was, you know, there was an audience who were just like, oh my God, like, you know, it's the queer Playboy. It's not that the Playboy is gay, but it's a feminist reading of Playboy, which actually we never set out to do. It's just sort of psychological study of like, what the fuck even is this, and why has it become the holy grail of like canonical text? Let's talk about that, guys. But then for the people who have never questioned that, that's maybe a bit jarring, and it's a bit like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to have that conversation, you know. So
exciting.
Yeah.
And then around that time, you know, I have to, even though, you know, going to get embarrassed again, probably say, you know, awards, but like the Joe Cox, you know, inaugural award for young female, that must have been some amazing.
Again, like, like kind of, I think, you know,
sorry.
I don't know. I think we just had a few years in Ireland where everyone was like, let's celebrate things that are like women and you know, gay things. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop embarrassing you. I won't mention the most influential women. Moving on. So obviously, you know, you worked in the Gate. You worked. Pop Baby. You've done a couple of really exciting new works with kind of Druid, you know,
Yeah.
and instead, you know, the political thing isn't there all the time, but I think it's the sensibility which is kind of fascinating that one can't help as a director bring your own. I mean, the shows are shite when you don't. Do you know what I mean? When you kind of,
Yeah.
you know, when you at least interrogate who you are and you're engaging with the work.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the adaptation space is interesting as well. And just before we kind of talk about Medea, the children. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that was a really interesting production, kind of, you know, because you had the roots of Irish canonical actors. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a very new and not experimental, but you know, a very new text.
Yeah.
It was that not clash of cultures, but you know, like that space was brilliant
Yeah.
inhabited, and that must have been really interesting. I mean, a joyous, presume, from a directorial point of view.
Yeah, it was, and it was a really kind of it was a really like there was something meta about it, which was like, you know, me as I don't know, I think it was 30 at the time, and you know, these were actors that like, yeah, they are they are the great actors. I wouldn't even say of their generation, but
Yeah,
like some of the best actors that Ireland's had. So there was an interesting thing of like I was probably more at home with the form, but they were more at home by virtue of being some of the greatest actors Ireland has had.
yeah,
And so actually the place of us meeting, I mean, it was a really interesting moment as well, because I moved back with my parents for the time. I think I must have been between places just before I was going back to London.
mm-hmm.
So I was kind of like having these fascinating days of rehearsing with you know, people who were sort of roughly the same age as my parents, and then coming home and like having, you know, brilliant chats over dinner with my parents. And you know, you kind of, you in the play there's this generational clash, and you know, Lucy talks so brilliantly about it, that like she purposely put in all of the sort of worst things that are sort of leveled at millennials, and all of the worst things that are leveled at boomers. But then actually what was happening in the rehearsal room and with my parents is like, well, we're like, there's a mutual appreciation thing going on here. So actually loads of that sort of like clash thing is it's kind of lazy. It's not really the reality of how, you know, what we're seeing is not a clash of generations. It's a clash of ideologies that essentially have been embedded by sort of, you know, media and again, kind of the state, the, you
Yeah.
know, neoliberal state. God, I sound like I'm going to start talking about QAnon or something, but anyway, hold off. But I think essentially it was just like this really interesting thing that was like, we're collaborating to make this show, which is sort of about the need for people to sort of get over all that, all the trappings of sort of indignation that get fed back to us on a loop, and how we've how opinions have sort of been siloed, and actually really, if you know, you find people across age groups, but also across class, race, whatever, who all care about the same thing, and that's what we're being asked to do in this moment. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was kind of powerful.
But I think you just kind of named something there as well around the polarization, say, you know, of opinion to fact. That kind of
Yeah,
goes becomes very fluid in the world of, you know, online, and the world of, you know, all that type of space. But you know, that play was extraordinarily powerful, and that kind of whole space is very powerful. And I suppose
yeah,
one of the and not to embarrass you again, but one of the compliments that kind of I would give to your work is that, you know, in the fact that you work across so many genres and so many types and so many stuff that kind of could be deemed as experimental, or you know, or contemporary, whatever those words are, to try and box things into other, your work,
yeah.
your own work, your own aesthetic is invisible, which I love. Do you know what I mean? You kind of,
Mm,
and you know, and I think that's testament to a great director, that it's kind of, you know, your authorship is in getting yourself out of the room. Do you know, man? And that kind of,
yeah,
well, that sorry, that
yeah.
but that's what comes across. Sorry, that's
Well, I think it's because I hear you. I think I'm really interested. You know, it's funny. We started the conversation about musical theater, which obviously it is hyper theatrical and
yeah,
points to its own theatricality, but actually a much more and that is there sometimes in sort of gestures within the work, which is like, remember, you're watching theater. But actually, like, you know, the people whose work I'm really interested in these days are people like Shane Meadows, you know, who manages to get these performances which, you know, are all about humanity and the full spectrum of how, you know, how we can be both the best of ourselves and the worst of ourselves. And I think that's the kind of sweet spot. If you're interested in sort of social realism and then you get to do that in a theatrical context, actually you can operate on a few different levels at the same time.
No, it's
and sort of draw it out of people in a way that feels very truthful to them.
But it's funny that you mentioned Shane. I mean, I think his work, again, a bit like ITI, will only be kind of in years to come that we've seen. I mean, I think, you know, particularly like The Virtues, which is one of the most extraordinary I've ever seen, you know, because it worked on so many different levels, and yet his work was completely invisible, you know. But like, in some ways, you know, you look at Medea and you have something that's, you know, it's epic Greek, and yet, you know, it's children, and beyond the difficulty of working with children, but just that realism, because, you know, that kind of getting those kids to that non-performative space, and then the wonderful Eileen, you know, but that was kind of, now that you say it, that kind of just makes sense. That kind of domestic drama, you know what I mean? That kind of and that was what made it so chilling in a way, and so beautiful, which is kind of the most disturbing thing about it. There was a great beauty to it.
Yeah. Well, working with kids as well, you know, it makes you think so much about craft and you know, how you communicate on craft as a director. Like, you really do sort of like leave you, like, they'll leave you hanging if what you're saying doesn't sort of ring true for them. They'll just be like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing the thing that I practiced at home with my mum. So yeah, it actually becomes this sort of weird like exploration of like aliveness and truth and all of those things that we take for granted.
I'm just kind of joking, coming back to that phrase that when you started off in Trinity about, you know, those that whatever have the best vocabulary doesn't necessarily, you know, as a director throwing in the odd kind of theatrical word or the odd reference, you know, this is going to be Brechtian. What?
What are you on about? Yeah, absolutely. Like, literally, you need to be able to explain it to whatever it was, a 10-year-old. Isn't that one of the old kind of tests?
And in between all that kind of drip feed, an amazing piece of work as well, you know. That, see you smiling about it, but that's something that kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's kind of, you know, one of the brilliant things then when you get to a certain level of kind of people know that you care about certain things, is like you have amazing writers like Karen Cogan come and go, would you be interested in directing this? And it's like, yeah, like, you know, because I think early on in your career you sort of have to develop things, you have to, you know, you have to kind of generate stuff, and then other times you just kind of get to go, amazing, I get to like be in a room with somebody who, you know, I would want to spend time with, even if I wasn't getting paid. So so yeah, amazing. And you know, she's somebody who's just kind of just leading just leading such an amazing charge in terms of diversifying, you know, kind of writers' rooms and really, you know, pushing. I have constant conversations with her about how she deals with, you know, with the systems and with the structures of power that writers move through as they move through the ranks, and gives you a lot of hope to know that people are asking those kind of awkward questions and putting their own work on the line in order to leave the door open for other people.
Yeah, I mean, to say it's not an easy thing to do, because it's a learned thing, you know, in a way, no matter what industry, but particularly in the arts and culture, because I say it's so small, and not just in Ireland, is that when you do start to move up a chain, that it becomes harder and harder in some ways to engage in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
fear is there to kind of go, fuck if I, and that's
Yeah.
that's the real sweet spot. And as I say, there's lots of people more than yourself that are kind of very engaged in that.
Mm.
Yeah. And come here to me, I won't keep much longer, but I'm interested in the storytelling, climate change, all that kind of area, and that side of your brain and that side of your, I suppose, artistic career in more kind of speaking and more kind of active, more overt kind of
Mm.
activism. And is that something that you find difficult? Is that or is that something you're comfortable with?
In terms of
Yeah,
speaking.
kind of
Um,
confronting something, or in terms of, not being the person in the room behind the scenes, or
um, no, I don't think I find it difficult. I think I am increasingly. No, I don't find it difficult. I'm lucky that I don't find it difficult. So I suppose the last couple of years I've been really just looking at how, and it comes back to the thing of like interrogating how 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 can we make it that, when I get asked to talk on something, that I can genuinely say not me but this person. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in like the ways that, you know I'm working with a company at the moment, the Big House in London, who, we work with people who have come through the care system, and time and time again, one of the things that comes up in the work is sort of, it's kind of this thing, we kind of label it anxiety, but really it's to do with feeling worth listening to, maybe, or feeling like you have ideas that are important, or ideas that are just worthy of being put across. So, I think it's about taking a step back from going amplify, say black voices, and going, okay, well, actually there's another thing that we need to do here, which is, and not to patronize, obviously there are many people who are in that space, but there's a whole rake of reasons why people don't feel that they can occupy those spaces. And so, with the idea being, let's talk about equity rather than equality. So equity asks, like, how can I help you to become more empowered to affect that change, or to speak for yourself, or to just be in that writer's room. So yeah, I'm kind of, I mean, you wouldn't believe it now. The last hour hasn't been a very good example of this, but I'm kind of interested in speaking less and helping others to do that more. Obviously, there will always be.
I asked you to speak. This is your air.
No, I mean, obviously there'll always be reasons that we need to say, hey, wait a second. But I think that there's a there's there's a kind of, yeah, I suppose it's about resilience. There's a kind of a resilience piece that you some people have it from a young age. Some people develop it. Some people develop it, lose it, find it again. But I actually think what's going to be needed in this kind of, was already manifest in the way that society has been structured pre-coronavirus, but obviously we're seeing this kind of exacerbated and extreme version of it, is that it's not enough to just say like, you need to speak up, or we need to make this space safe for people to speak up. We actually need to go back one step further and look at the ways that we care for people in our society, and the ways that we can engender a greater sense of personal agency to people. And I think art is an amazing way to do that, and that's at the core of the work that I'm doing with the Big House. Is like, actually you can really foster people's kind of sense of I deserve to be listened to, really quite quickly through art. Because we all had those, you asked me at the start, and what were you doing? Well, I was behind a curtain with a lamp. And my parents, they listened, they clapped at the end. They might have been thinking, oh Jesus, here she goes again, but like, actually that's very simple. It's very simple kind of feedback loop that many people get as children and many people don't. And I think in Irish society, I'm particularly interested in now the kind of notion of care, and what care can look like in the future, and how we can kind of revolutionize through our various different institutions which are currently letting people down. You know, it's the kind of conversation around direct provision. It's like, end direct provision, and then what? And then what? Then what do we do? So we're going to need all of these different mechanisms actually to kind of really look at how we make a society where the idea of other becomes completely eradicated, you know, because actually there's no point in saying you can't be Irish and racist if we still think of Irish as a monolith. Actually, how can we create a system where, as you know, over time, and that's like, it's the legacy piece again, over time that becomes less and less of a need. So as an artist, then you think, well, okay, how can my work have a kind of built-in obsolescence so that, you know, I can you know, work with people, and then sort of that's a sort of a social mechanism where I can move away, and then that doesn't need to, it never needs to be done again, in a way, you know, because people are doing it themselves. So
Wow.
that's the hope.
Sorry, I mean, just kind of, you've articulated so much of what I personally fundamentally believe, and I think particularly around the but what then, because I think there's so much can be done about kind of going, that's wrong, that shouldn't be there, but like the space, the real space, or the real politics space is what next. I'm going to leave you at that. That was amazing. Sorry, you have to kind of making my day wonderful now. Starting into this, and you're after kind of cheering me up. Of course, the whole purpose of the Access Chats.
Exactly. We need to look after you, Mark. Well, it's cheered me up as well. So more chats.
Thanks a million. And as I say, good luck with the rest of the hopefully emergent from this lockdown space that we're all in. And
thank you.
Ways of having more, say, on the ground chats in the very near future.
Exactly. Yeah. Fingers crossed. Take care. Good chat.